Psalm 139 reminds us that God knows us when He is in us. For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, and I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And we may have forgotten who we are, what we are called to do. And we are called on to be Christians in the world. And we are called on to share the power and the love and the grace of God with everyone. Even if we've been together in this church our entire lives, or for years and years and years, we may have forgotten who we are, and we've forgotten who the other people are, too. And more importantly, we've forgotten whose we are. We belong to God. We belong to God. And He's called us to serve Him. He's called us to serve His kingdom. And we may have forgotten, or we just aren't aware of how God sees us. How does God see you? What does God see when He looks at you? He sees us as children. Even these children that I talked about, that are supposed to be in, He sees us as children. He sees us as His beloved. He sees us as people under His care, under His protection. And He might look at us and see us as mighty mortals. Mighty mortals. So we look at the story of Gideon. Every year we have a Gideon speaker come from the local, what they call them, camps. Gideon camp. They have Gideon speakers come from the local Gideon camp, and they talk about the work that the Gideons do. And I say it every year, and I mean it. I say it again today. I will always open the scripture door to a Gideon because they do such incredible work. And they reach so many people, passing out scripture, passing out the Testament, and they change lives by handing out the Bible and by witnessing to the power of Christ. And so I love having the Gideons come. But every year when the Gideons come, we read a small portion of the Gideon story. And I never could deal with Gideon from the pulpit. And this year when I was preparing for speaker, and I can't remember what it was. But when I was preparing for it, the story of Gideon really hit me, and I decided I'm going to preach on Gideon. So for today and the next 2 Sundays, I'm going to look at the story of Gideon. I think most of the story of Gideon. And when we look at the beginning of the story, we can see that Gideon having an identity crisis. Gideon doesn't realize who he is and whose he is. Gideon has forgotten who he is. If you look at Judges in chapter 6, that's where the Gideon story begins. And for the first 10 verses, it gives you kind of a history of what's going on. The Israelites are struggling, and the Israelites are suffering. The land of Canaan has been overrun. And it tells you in Judges 6 that the reason is that the Israelites have done evil in the sight of God. They have failed to obey God. They have failed to worship God. They've forgotten who they were. And so God gets angry with them and punishes them and allows the Midianites to overrun them. And so now the Israelites are suffering under the oppression of these outside forces. Judges 6 tells you that the Israelites even go hide in caves. They go up in the mountains to avoid being overrun by these oppressors. And whenever they try to raise crops, whenever they plant their grains and try to produce food for themselves, the Midianites and the Amalekites and other people come in and they steal everything. They take all that they have, and they overrun the land, and they take their livestock. And Judges 6 verse 5 even says that they ravage the land. So the Bible says that the Israelites were impoverished, and they were oppressed, and they were suffering so much that they cried out to God. And God reminds them. He was God who had taken them out of slavery from Egypt. He was the God who had cared for them. And He was the God who had prepared a land for them. And He was the God who had protected them. And then they forgot about that. told them not to worship any other God, and they did. And God, in His anger, Judges 6, verse 10, God said, you have not listened to me. Not listened to me. These are like forgotten who they were. They'd forgotten whose they were. They had an identity crisis, and among them was Gideon, also having an identity crisis. We find Gideon in a wine press, a place that's all built up, and so it's kind of sheltered, and no one can see him in there. He was threshing wheat, and he was doing it in hiding because he didn't want the Midianites to come and steal his food. And that's when an angel of the Lord appears to him. Judges 6, verse 12. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. We can see that God sees Gideon differently than Gideon sees himself. Gideon was hiding. He was afraid of his enemies, and here God calls him a warrior. And Gideon doesn't believe it. And he starts complaining to God. You know, he claims that God has been with the Israelites. All these problems would not have happened. And he begins to make excuses and he begins to point the finger at God. Judges 6, verse 13. If the Lord is with us, why did all this happen to us? Where are all those wonders that our fathers told us about? Now the Lord has abandoned us, put us into the hands of Gideon. Gideon blames God for all the problems. And we do that. I was just talking to somebody a couple days ago, and they asked, why is God making my life so difficult? That's a tough one to answer. Because what I want to say is, I don't think it's God, it's you. Why is your life so difficult? Maybe you're making stupid decisions. We don't want to hear that. So we blame God. Life is difficult because God must be angry with me. God has abandoned me. But Judges 6 tells us that the people had disobeyed God, and that's why God was so angry with them. They turned their backs on God. The Israelites could not listen to God, and that was the problem. So the angel verse 6, verse 14. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have, and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? And we see this identity crisis continue. God doesn't see, Gideon doesn't see that God is with him, that God is going to be that strength, and God is going to be that guide. Gideon doesn't see himself as a mighty warrior, and he doesn't see the strength that he's going to get from God. Instead, Gideon sees himself as weak, as worthless, and blames God for everything. And we can have our own identity crisis. We can forget who we are. And we can forget what we're supposed to be doing all this time. As Christians, what are we supposed to be doing? Well, we've forgotten all this. And like Gideon, we could have our own identity crisis and not realize who we're supposed to be as people. Verse 15, how can I say this? My friend is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Gideon saw himself as the least of the least. He was the worst of the worst. Everybody was better than he was. Everyone was stronger. He saw himself as having absolutely no ability.